Radio Free Campus, brought to you by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni.
Welcome to Radio Free Campus. I'm Steve McGuire.
And I'm Justin Garrison, and in this episode, Steve and I will discuss pandemonium at the podium, the good, the bad, and the ugly from this year's commencement addresses. There's been a lot to go around, so we've got a lot to get into. And then at the end of the episode, we will do our regular awards for the Apparatchik of the month and the Hero of the People. So let's get to it. And Steve, before we start talking about actual commencement addresses from this one, I know that you've been a student and you've been a faculty member. Have you ever heard a good graduation speech?
I can't remember a graduation speech that I've ever heard, so I think the answer is no. Although I have to say I did not attend my own graduation as an undergrad. I had already moved to take a job. Maybe not a problem as many students have today as they should, given the rise of AI and all of that. But yeah, I'd already left town. My master's degree I did not attend, and I think my PhD I finally did attend that one, but it was only because I think my fiance and my parents told me I had to.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And also, as a faculty member, I found ways to avoid quite a few of the commencements that I was supposed to be at. Often there's a pretty good conference right around that time that I was giving a paper at or something.
Yeah, no, where I used to teach, they had something that was like, it was whatever the millimeter below, like absolute, policy was of like, you have to go to this. But yeah, I often found an important conference in my, Barca Lounger.
Have you ever heard
involving?
Sorry, have you ever heard a good speech? I want to ask you the same question.
Not really. Yeah. I mean, most of them, at a lot of schools, right? These are just investment opportunities, right? You give a big donation, we'll let you pretend that you're a professor for a couple minutes. You get to wear the outfit and say some funny stuff and whatever. No, not really. Yeah.
It sounded like Eric Church at UNC this year with the guitar.
That was cool.
That seemed like a pretty good one. Everyone, of course, knows David Foster Wallace, This Is Water. That's one that you could actually talk about.
That's like iconic. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I have to say, I think my favorite memory at any commencement ever is probably sitting next to one of my colleagues, watching him literally count the number of education graduates who were listed as summa cum laude.
That's so mean, but so
which was
fair.
Like way higher than in any other program.
Yes. I had a friend who did that, and the senior project, I'm working on this thing on religiously motivated international terrorism in different parts of the world. And my friend had to make a board game to teach kids about vowels. And I thought, there's just no justice in this world. St. Augustine is right. This is just awful.
Yeah.
But enough of my Nietzschean resentment. So I would still take a bland, anodyne, forgettable speech over a lot of the things that seem to have happened this year. We've got a whole host of pretty, mediocre, unfortunate situations and speeches. Do you want to start with Michigan?
Sure. Yeah. I guess we could do probably an annual Radio Free Campus commencement season episode if we wanted to. It's almost
guaranteed, that's a great idea.
That there's going to be stories like this. But yeah, there's so many of them that we decided to basically devote the whole episode to it. But of course, one of the first ones was at the University of Michigan, where a faculty member who's the outgoing chair of the faculty senate was given an opportunity to speak. He had to have his remarks sort of vetted in advance. And, he basically gave a kind of homage to the history of student activism at the University of Michigan. But honestly, the whole thing seemed to be orchestrated so that he could, at the end, praise the pro-Palestinian activists, who have been there over the last couple of years. And he changed the wording of the speech from what he had gotten approved by the administration. And, it was worse in certain respects in terms of being more active in terms of blaming Israel and these sorts of things. I do have to say that it seems like possibly the university administration did approve some remarks about Palestine or Gaza and Israel in advance. So I think there's some blame to go all around here. But they had apparently asked him not to use the word genocide, and it seems like he didn't do that. But you can compare. He's put out what he says he submitted, and you can compare. The real issue with this one, though, is the fact that he was there in a kind of official role as, the only reason he's invited is because he's the chair of the faculty senate, I think, right? Nobody's inviting him personally because they want to hear his views on anything, right?
That's correct.
And so he's really supposed to give something, I think, that's representative of the faculty, a 5-minute set of remarks, congratulating the students on what they've accomplished or whatever. And instead he decided to focus on activism and then, changed his remarks to make it, more pointed in terms of its criticism of Israel. So I think there's lots of ways you could talk about this. There's the whole background question of, how political should a commencement address be at all? I mean, I think if you're inviting somebody from off campus, giving them an honorary degree, and their work is in political activism, you can expect that they're going to talk about that, and that's something that you're honoring them for. But in this case, it's a faculty member, like I said, they're in an official role, and, really should have given some fairly perfunctory remarks, I think, and instead decided to do something else. And of course, there was a huge, blow up on campus among alumni and in the media about this.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say much for the cause of justice when it begins in deceiving people. Like there's something kind of morally wonky about that. There's also an interesting question. I think you and I have talked about this, in our work life, about institutional neutrality, right? Michigan does have a policy of institutional neutrality. It's a fairly good policy, right? It's a robust one. It's not kind of just a generic, we're going to be neutral, but it really tries to spell out to whom it applies and things like that. I don't know because I'm not a trustee there or something, but I think you could make a case that this is certainly something that runs afoul of the policy or certainly comes up to that limit because, again, as you said, he's there in an official capacity, not as a member of the faculty. And so the reflexive response is, you're trying to deny academic freedom. Well, that's not really the issue here. It's about institutional neutrality, not academic freedom. It just seems, and it's this kind of thing where, again, even if you assume that the professor is absolutely right, what does that actually do for people in Gaza? Nothing.
Yeah.
Doesn't do anything. I mean, it just makes him feel like a better person.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and, maybe some people are, but certainly we're not saying he can't have his views and but it's the forum here, right? And
it's the
role
occasion
that he's playing. And and if you look at their institutional neutrality policy, it does list a number of people in various positions who are expected to abide by the policy, including I think department chairs and that sort of thing. And it doesn't explicitly mention the chair of the faculty senate, but it has a kind of final category of and others in similar roles or something to that effect.
Right.
And I think you can make a pretty good case that the leader of the faculty senate at an official ceremony of the university, it certainly falls within the spirit of what this policy is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Of course, this was not the only commencement dust-up involving Israel or Israel and Gaza. Another one that was particularly egregious was at Georgetown University's law school. They had invited Morton Shapiro, former president of Northwestern University, I believe, as well as Williams College. They invited him to give the talk, and basically students objected simply because he is a Zionist. And he had written some things in the past about Israel or about Israel and Gaza. But you really got the sense that they just thought somebody who supports Israel is not eligible to be the commencement speaker at Georgetown Law's graduation ceremony, which is just so absurd. And, he himself said, he was going to give remarks that had nothing to do with that. And he ended up withdrawing. So we should be clear, Georgetown Law technically didn't cancel him. But their students raised a fuss, and he decided to back out rather than be a distraction. And we don't know how hard Georgetown Law, fought to try and get him to come. I didn't see any signs that they had really reprimanded their students, or what have you. But he should have obviously been able to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's just. You get to the sense, or you get to the point where you wonder, like, what's the value of these speeches when they've become either political from the speaker's perspective, or like the student expectation is we only want to hear things that confirm whatever it is that we already believe. I find the whole thing strange, and it is disappointing that you have kind of like a routine system now of people either just deciding on their own for their own reasons to spare themselves the grief of having to go through like a contentious commencement speech, or they get disinvited. Like, it's just, either way, it's not good.
Yeah, and this case is obviously particularly ugly because if the standard is that Zionists are not eligible to speak, that excludes, the great majority of Jews from being eligible. Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of other people as well who support Israel in various ways. So, but the idea that, whatever percentage of Jews it is that support Israel would not be eligible, according to these students, to speak at their commencement is just horrendous. Yeah,
I think it's crazy.
On the flip side, we had a situation at Rutgers where one of their graduates, I believe from their engineering college, was invited back to speak, and there was he was actually disinvited because of some anti-Israel remarks that he had made in the past. And we have to say some of the things he said are pretty horrendous.
They're terrible,
without a doubt. But in general, our position is that once somebody's invited, they should be allowed to speak. And so I think we would have had to say in this case that, Rutgers should have, stuck to their guns and allowed him to be the commencement speaker. I think a sort of secondary lesson here is to be more careful in how you select commencement speakers as well, which is a lesson that, probably several of these schools could learn.
Yeah, I think, the reporting that I've seen, the comments are social media comments, right? From this, so yeah, how is that not part of the process in 2026? That's what year we're in, right?
For now, just for now.
When we get to something later, it's going to feel like we went back about 4 years. I mean, these aren't terribly hard things to find, and you just save yourself so much controversy and embarrassment if you just go through and do some due diligence. Who is this person? And then, like, what's their social media profile? And have they said things that we're willing to absorb pushback, or have they said things where we just don't want this speech to go forward? Do that before the invitation so you don't look foolish. Yeah. Because you get into this exact situation where nobody's happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's probably room for debate too about, what the range is for commencement addresses and what the expectation is for commencement addresses. I saw Greg Lukianoff, the, president of FIRE, posted, I forget what it was in response to. I don't think it was in response to this. But, he made a point that if by the end of your college days, you're not prepped to be able to hear somebody say some things that you disagree with, maybe even strongly disagree with or find offensive, then your college has failed you. And I think that's an interesting point, as well. You could make a case that, even at a commencement, whatever someone says, you should be able to, withstand that and go about your day or something like that. And, I do find that partly compelling. But on the other hand, when you're talking specifically about a graduation ceremony and a commencement address, I could understand why people, they're celebrating an accomplishment. They've got family there in attendance with them. It's supposed to be something where everybody's celebrating together. And so I could also see arguing that, this is actually a particular moment where you really want to avoid doing anything that's particularly divisive. I do have to say, for conservatives who have sat through sat through these things across the country over the years, hearing people say things that you don't agree with is a commonplace during these commencement addresses, right? The Buckley Institute just put out this report looking at Class Day speakers at Yale and looking at honorary degree recipients at Yale, and almost no Republicans among them. And, I was saying, I've managed skillfully to avoid attending many commencements over the course of my career, but the ones that I've gone to, most of the people who have spoken, I'm like, okay, whatever, this person is I'm probably going to disagree with them politically. Maybe they'll talk about that, maybe they won't. Sure. You just have zero expectation that they're going to pick somebody at commencement who's going to say political things that, people on the right would agree with. So, but having said that, with the, Israel and Gaza and what Jews in this country have faced in the last couple of years, is having to sit through something like the remarks at the University of Michigan made by the faculty chair, or if the speaker at Rutgers had given the talk and had talked about Israel and Gaza. I mean, it really would have been yet another indignity in a long sort of train of abuses that they've experienced over the last few years, especially.
Yeah, for sure. So, Steve, how would you like to be someone who wrote a book and then you gave a speech that basically confirmed your thesis?
Yeah, well, you could just stop at wrote a book and I'd be happy with that. But I assume you're talking about Jonathan Haidt at NYU.
Absolutely.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And I mean, that's really the one comment that almost everybody made about this, is that they're just simply confirming his thesis, right? That the students were upset. Although I think, partly they were upset because of some of the things he said about DEI or, whatever. And, but, part of it was just that, well, he's just not as exciting or as famous as Taylor Swift, and there were a couple of quotes from students who were, at least one I saw anyways, it said something to the effect of, you do all this work, you spend all this money, and you're looking forward to this big celebration. And at the end, it's not even somebody like Taylor Swift.
I mean, because that's the pinnacle of higher education.
That's what it was all for.
You get to meet the smartest people in the country.
Yeah.
It's like, every Mensa chapter sends a representative, and she's one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't even get to meet her. You get to sit in Yankee Stadium and hear an echoey version of a speech.
Honestly, that was one of the most staggering things is, I know NYU's bigger than like any school I've ever gone to. Yeah. But the first thing I saw in the headline, like under that picture, I was like, oh my God, that's Yankee Stadium. And it says there are 12,000 graduates. I was like, what the heck is how do they have that many people doing anything, let alone graduating? I mean, that's incredible, mind blowing.
It is incredible.
But yeah, I mean, it is kind of sad, right? Because, you would think, or I think the commencement ceremony is kind of the apex, like the icing on the cake or whatever, of the education that you received. And so this is an appropriate choice. Whereas, I mean, if you just want to see Taylor Swift or I don't know, somebody, some other famous person. I can't think of anyone that anyone under the age of 40 would know. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But like, it's just, that's lame. You can go see those people any other time of the week.
Yeah. Yeah. And they booed him too when he actually gave the speech, which the Atlantic published his address, I believe, as well. And the headline was "Pay Attention," and I thought, well, they were certainly paying attention if they were booing him. They at least knew he was up there. But yeah, he did talk about some of his research about an advocacy around phones and attention spans and social media and all that sort of thing. But yeah, it was it was almost just like this perfect encapsulation of the problem, right? That he had actually written a book about, the coddling of the American mind, and here are these students complaining and trying to get him canceled. And I think the student leading the charge was was a marketing student in the business school, and Haidt, he's a sociologist, but he's in the business school. So this is like, technically one of the professors in this kid's specific school at NYU too.
And I think it was that student or somebody else, like, it was interviewed in the New York Times article about this. And it was like, trying to establish a distinction that for me just didn't work. It's like, hey, we're not opposed to hearing like, different perspectives. We just want a speaker who shares our values.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is a theme. I don't
know if those things fit together.
This is an interesting theme that in a way keeps coming up with these things is, well, like, whose values, what are the values of the community? Who's outside of those values? What's the Overton window for a speaker? You've got the students at Georgetown Law saying anyone who's a Zionist is outside the window of what's acceptable, right? If you're talking about our values in a way that is totally intolerant to these kinds of political disagreements, right? You've got a pretty serious problem in a campus community if that's how they're thinking about these things. On the other hand, if you look at the guy at Rutgers, some people say, well, are his views outside the realm of what's acceptable? And it's like, well, okay, some of the things he said are like, pretty awful. He's not just he's not just maybe making statements in support of Palestinians or talking about the suffering of people in Gaza or something like that, right? He's making he's borderline engaging in I don't know what you would call it exactly, but it's pretty bad, the thing that he said. So
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of value. And I know that one of the debates over academic freedom is whether or not what you're saying has to have any value. But yeah, we can do more than just like whatever the actual minimum is here as well. So
I should mention too that Haidt's co-author, Greg Lukianoff, who I mentioned a moment ago, he received an honorary degree at Dartmouth, and some students wrote a letter in the student paper there saying that they were going to turn their backs on him and encouraging other people to do so as well. And honestly, I haven't followed up on that to see how that played out. I assume that at least those students did that. If it's happened already. But Greg responded online and was like, absolutely. And, FIRE will defend your right to do that, because they defend non-disruptive protest. And so if someone's giving a talk and you want to quietly stand up and hold a sign or turn your back to them, these sorts of things, that's free speech too. And so I thought both Haidt and Lukianoff handled these separate incidents well, right? Like Haidt just basically didn't engage. He didn't drop out. He went ahead and gave his talk. And Lukianoff was like, yeah, here's, a good lesson for how free speech works, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
Good. So what's next? We're not done. We're going to
talk about every university in the United States. This is going to be our first, what are those go to sleep YouTube videos that are 15 hours long? Yeah. I see Curtis is threatening to murder both of us right now. Let's speed it up. Okay. This one was more to me just kind of amusing, because it's like the left kind of twisting itself into a straitjacket. So the mayor of Boston, who is a Michelle Wu, who is an alumnus of the Harvard Law School, was invited to give the commencement address to the law school, but grad students at Harvard are engaged in a strike action for pursuing their labor related objectives, and so the mayor tried to work with the striking graduate students, offering, perhaps to acknowledge their cause in her remarks, or to do other things in exchange for them perhaps not picketing and making a nuisance of themselves during the remarks. They said they wouldn't do that. They claimed they offered, some kind of alternative off-site location for the remarks. The mayor didn't want to do that. So the mayor just dropped out, withdrew from giving the talk. It was unclear at the time that I was doing this research if the law school is even going to provide an alternative speaker. But I just thought it was, kind of an interesting story, right? It's demonstrating the commitments of one's beliefs, perhaps, that the mayor withdrew in solidarity with striking students because the mayor didn't want to be perceived as pulling what Ronald Reagan did in the 60s, which was breaking the strike lines because he wanted to make movies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
although I think, she tried to negotiate some alternative. She said at one point she would even speak in favor of their cause during her remarks if they allowed her to speak,
right.
So I think she was probably a bit frustrated herself. I think she wanted to do it and she wanted to work with the grad student union to find a way that, would make it make sense. And they just were unrelenting in their request that she not, give these remarks. My joke when I saw this, such as it was that they should have picked a Republican. This would have been a great opportunity.
I've got no problem walking right through.
That's right. Yeah. It would have, they would have got points for, viewpoint diversity. They would have avoided this problem altogether. Although probably the students would have been outraged potentially.
Probably even more, resistance to letting the person physically access the grounds or something like that.
Yeah, you're kind of, in a lot of these cases, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, which is, that's when you start to question, should we even have a commencement speaker anymore? A sort of quietism in the face of this problem is, I'm sure one option that some places have at least quietly considered and maybe even longed for.
I mean, it's seriously worth thinking about because, again, you and I know this in a way that other people might not. These are incredibly long events because everyone wants to talk, and I worked at a school where because of a variety of things, you'd end up having 5 or 6 valedictorians somehow. And every one of them got to talk. And then this administrator has to talk. And then that guy has to talk and she has to talk and blah, blah, blah. And, we had a pool going as faculty members at what minute in the ceremony will we actually start handing out degrees? And it was never under an hour. Mm-hmm. It was hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. And then you finally get to the thing that, parents want to see. They want to see their child go across the stage, get the diploma, a nice picture, and they've accomplished something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I get it. I wish people would think more about that angle here.
Yeah.
Pick Ron Swanson, basically.
Divide them up into schools.
Talk. Something, because it's too long. The last thing that I wanted to just briefly draw attention to is what looks like the universal and well-deserved criticism of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
It seems like, everyone had some kind of anecdote or connection to AI in their talk. And a lot of people like Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, got booed at University of Arizona. A real estate mogul got booed at University of Central Florida for this. And the one that I was talking to you about off camera before we started recording was at MTSU in Nashville, where it's a music executive talking about AI and then got into it with the audience a little bit. It's hear me now or pay for it later. And I was just I was hoping that the ghost of Patsy Cline would just emerge and destroy this guy or something. Cause it was it's not enough that this is killing so many things, but music is the thing that Nashville does. And that's a huge program at MTSU. And
right.
To just write off human creativity like that was so ugly. And I'm so glad it got booed. But there's definitely, so if there's someone listening, you're thinking about being a commencement speaker in 2027, just leave that topic alone. Find your own minefield, to try to navigate because this, is not going to work for you going forward. I just thought it was more amusing than anything else.
Yeah,
and, it seemed like it happened in a lot of places.
Yeah, no, that was very funny to see. And, I'll mention that, Ronnie Chang was the class day speaker at Harvard. And I watched some of his remarks and I can't repeat on this podcast.
Yes, this is a family show.
Although we did allow Alex Byrne to drop the F-bomb, one time last year.
Did we allow it or did it just happen?
Yeah, we just kind of didn't reach a decision and then it happened, I guess.
All right, that's nice.
But normally dropping F-bombs is not the ACTA way. And so I'm going to, I think
our F word is fiduciary responsibility.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, very good. But it was funny because he addressed some of these events that you're talking about, and he kind of, attacked AI and got a cheer out of the crowd and said, "Oh, good, I had prepared 2 speeches, one pro AI and one anti AI," and and then he just went on to with a lot of colorful language, attack AI, and it was funny enough, but he clearly was aware, of what had happened at some of these other commencement addresses.
That's like Speaker 101. You've got to be able to read the room or it's just not going to go.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, so, commencement season is sort of always going to, I think, bring some of these controversies. We saw obviously a number this year. And, again, I would say, and we're going to get to an op-ed that Daniel Diermeier wrote here in a few moments, which will give me an opportunity to add a bit more to this. And so I don't want to duplicate it here. But one thing I will say, too, is similar to advice we've given in other contexts, is that if you have sort of clearly established procedures or parameters for what you're doing with these things, and you have a history of operating consistently in a certain way, I think that can again give an administration the ability to respond to criticisms when they do arise. And, so if instead of one Republican, Yale had given honorary degrees to, 25, 30, would we dare say 50-50 in a country that really only has 2 viable political parties? And people complained oh, you're giving an honorary degree to this, this Democrat that we don't like, or this Republican that we don't like. You say, well, we've given a bunch to the other side over the years as well. And that's just how we do it, right? You always have that response in your back pocket if you need it. And, you should be operating in a more, I think, even-handed and consistent way. And it's not necessarily about obviously having, 50-50 Republicans and Democrats, but when it's one versus however many Democrats, again, that sort of reveals, I think, something, right, about the nature.
The game's rigged.
Yeah, exactly. And so, similarly with commencement addresses in general, if you're picking a variety of people, sometimes you bring in comedians, sometimes you bring in musicians, sometimes you bring in politicians, journalists, and people who have, achieved great things in their careers or in their lives. And, sometimes they're, alums of the institution. You can sort of point to that constellation of people you've invited and say, look, we understand that you don't agree with everything this person has said or everything that they maybe represent to you, but they have accomplished great things. They're a graduate of the program. They're not going to be talking about that. This is kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
So... But with that, should we get to the hero of the people and the apparatchik of the month?
Yeah.
All right, good. So first we'll go with the hero of the people. So this month, we've selected Chancellor Daniel Diermeier of Vanderbilt University, someone we've mentioned already today and have mentioned many times on this show. We like the work that he's doing, not just at Vanderbilt, but as a leader in higher ed more broadly quite a bit. We've had him speak at an ACTA event in the past about institutional neutrality. People can look that up on our website. He gave a fantastic speech. You can watch the video. We've also published a transcript of the remarks, very much worth watching or reading. And, he, of course, with the, I believe, is it the Chancellor of Washington and St. Louis? I think they also have a Chancellor. They published an ad, I guess you would call it, in the Wall Street Journal, maybe a year and a half ago, talking about some key principles in higher ed and sort of getting back to basics in terms of freedom of expression and focus on, teaching and research and that sort of thing. And he's just come out in the last week or so with an op-ed in USA Today. University commencement isn't the place for politics. Once universities enter the game of politics, we dilute our purpose and play a different game, one we might well lose if the decline of public trust in universities is any indication. And again, this is just so consistent with the principles of freedom of expression and institutional neutrality that he's been arguing for. And, this is, sort of what I was saying earlier in the episode today, too, that, commencement really isn't the place or the time to engage in politics, certainly not divisive politics. And it's really a time to celebrate the accomplishments of students. And so, that's what Diermeier talks about in this op-ed. And, I think he's got it right here. And that, schools should be looking to pick commencement speakers who will be appealing to all the students, or certainly most of the students. Maybe you can't please all the people all the time. And that, you're asking them in their remarks, to talk about things that will be meaningful to everybody in the audience, and not just to a particular segment who's, maybe more concerned to talk about their political opinions, or have everyone hear their political views than, celebrate the accomplishments of all these students who are graduating.
Yeah, it's an excellent piece. Anyone interested in this topic should definitely read it. So if you've done the Hero of the People, that means it falls to me to introduce this episode's Apparatchik of the Month. On May 8th of this year, 2026, Aaron Sabarian, he's a reporter with the Washington Free Beacon, wrote an article titled, quote, "Anti-Racist Critical Pedagogy," unquote. Penn State Law School's new strategic plan devoted to anti-racism raises legal questions. And then this is the kind of the introduction to the piece, which has a lot of really interesting and possibly damning details for the institution. Sabarian writes, in an internal planning document distributed to faculty last month, Pennsylvania's flagship law school promised to devote the entire institution to anti-racism, from recruitment and hiring decisions to research and classroom instruction. Penn State Dickinson Law said it would, quote, "recruit, retain, teach, and research according to anti-racist principles," unquote, and embrace an anti-racist critical pedagogy, according to the document that the Washington Free Beacon had obtained. So this is just, I had asked earlier, what year is this? Because when I read this, I thought, oh, this is like from 2022 or like some old story. No, this just happened.
They're still going.
Did the dean of the law school like get a DeLorean and like travel back in time and pick up this document? I mean, I don't know what's going on. But Danielle Conway is the dean of the law school, as well as the director of the law school's Anti-Racist Development Institute. And this really seems to be something that in terms of efforts and interest in implementing would be, throughout the law school, which would be kind of a problem. Assuming that you think anti-racism is not a value-neutral pedagogy, but is a value-laden pedagogy. It's an ideological approach to teaching that assumes certain things about human nature and systems of justice and all sorts of things. Yeah. And that's an idea system that, in and of itself, by all means, teach it, have a diversity of ideas. But if that's the whole shooting match for the law school, I would be really concerned that you're going to get exposed to anything other than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that creates a real problem. I mean, I know that you've read this. Many people listening to this have read this. But, one of the things in Democracy in America that Tocqueville talks about is lawyers. And that lawyers are like the lowercase c conservative glue of the society, because they're steeped in the traditions and the precedents of the law, that you don't get radical change. This is just like a full-on complete opposite of that. I mean, this is law as ideological revolution. Mm-hmm. And that's really bad if you're going to court and your lawyer says, "Don't worry, everything's fine. I've been trained in anti-racist pedagogy." Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's bad.
God help us if the lawyers are the glue that's holding us together,
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, so this is a pretty big story. And then, about 12 days later, Sabarian wrote a follow-up and this is how it's described in his piece from, May 18th, mm-hmm. A conservative nonprofit called Protect the Public's Trust has filed a complaint alleging that this plan violates Titles 4 and 7, as well as the Civil Rights Act. So, there's going to be plenty more, no doubt, that is going to play out in court to determine to what extent, if any, of this strategic plan gets implemented, and so on and so forth. But this is really troubling. I mean, we've kind of talked about this a little bit in different episodes. It's not as if what's happening at the undergraduate experience doesn't matter. I'm not suggesting that. But there's something that's really pernicious about the infusion of ideology in these professional schools like law schools and medical schools. Mm-hmm. Because if you're talking to someone at a dinner party and they have this kind of obnoxious, ideological slant on things, you can just kind of walk away and talk to someone more reasonable. But if your cardiologist is looking at you as a function of anti-racist pedagogy, I mean, that really could be like life or death. And it's the same thing with law. I mean, this should be the most objective, dispassionate, non-discriminatory kind of undertaking. Not, I'm going to think about it through this overtly ideological lens. So to me, this is like 100% Apparatchik territory. So that's why I picked it.
Yeah, no, it's a good pick. And I mean, again, it brings up the Georgetown law and the students complaining about this speaker, right? Obviously not the same kind of thing, but highlighting this concern that you're expressing about, ideology in these schools. There was, of course, the shout down recently at Berkeley Law as well of a Trump administration official. And we've seen these kinds of things in the past as well. So, I think there's, definitely reason to be concerned. And like you said, with something like this, it's one thing to have people at the university or at the law school who want to teach these things, research these things, talk about them, but to make it the umbrella under which everybody has to fit in the entire institution, that's where it becomes particularly problematic. And, it'll be interesting to see how the complaint is handled. Obviously, the current administration is trying to take the logic of the SFFA decision, I think, and sort of apply that in other areas as well. And, that's going to take time to see how that works out, in terms of this administration and future ones, as well as, of course, the courts. So,
so no doubt we'll do a follow-up on this at some point as this situation continues to develop.
Definitely. Oh, I should mention too, by the way, that we have evaluated Penn State as part of our Campus Freedom Initiative. And I just double checked and they score an 8 out of 20 on our gold standard for freedom of expression, which is very much below average and actually a little bit higher than I remembered, but still
I think
not
that
great.
was up from a 3 the first time we gave them a pass before we started publishing these online. And I guess, I would say that within the institution, this is not like some profound deviation from what Penn State as such is really after in the last several years.
No, there was another guy who had a lawsuit going as well for something similar, not in the law school, but in a different program.
Yeah.
And, the lawsuit, I think, didn't ultimately end up going anywhere. I think it's dead at this point, although
I think it is,
don't quote me on that. But a bunch of stuff was certainly revealed through the court filings that was very troubling.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that is all we have for this episode of Radio Free Campus. So we'll see you all next time.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed the 2026 commencement rundown. We'll look forward to doing it next year. And until then, KBO.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Radio Free Campus. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. Audio-only versions of Radio Free Campus are available on all other podcast streaming platforms. Whether you have comments, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, the hosts would love to hear from you. Comment below or email them at radiofreecampus@goacta.org. Radio Free Campus is offered by the Campus Freedom Initiative at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. For more information, please visit goacta.org. 58% of Virginia Commonwealth University students surveyed say they would feel uncomfortable being close friends with someone who holds different views on gender, race, or social justice issues. Discover more at goacta.org.